Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. So we have a half an hour. Consider that mercy for everyone who's had to deal with some of these presentations. I want to walk through. The original goal tonight was actually to do some things that were a bit more optimistic, some things that we've identified where you could actually modernize and cut the cost of this government and actually do the job that we're supposed to do here. But I need to clear up a couple things. So first, I owe everyone, because apparently last week when I was speaking so fast, I didn't explain this particular chart. So I'm making up for myself last week. The point I was trying to make is, in the last fiscal year, our borrowing represented about 6.4% of the entire economy. When you have individuals around here saying, okay, we have these parts of our 2017 tax reform that expire at the end of next year. If we just extend those and don't pay for them, that's what drives us to almost 9.2% of the entire economy 9 years from now. So 9 budget years from now. If we actually find a way to pay for them and still extend those tax reforms, we actually get some economic growth. If you just let everyone's taxes go up, you end up at the end of the decade, or 9 years, about a little under 7% of the entire economy borrowed. So look, it's a little geeky, but the passion I've tried to show here is, I believe it's the moral thing to do is we don't let the portions on the middle class, their taxes go up next year. But we also step up and find a way to pay for it. And the CBO and the Joint Economic Economists last week, and it's going to be one of the boards here, actually showed if you pay for the tax extensions, actually, at the end of the decade, the economy's gotten bigger. And it will make sense. You haven't taken functionally what would be $4.6 trillion out of the economy and used it for borrowing. You left it there so the small business, the big business, your family, there's money that you can borrow to grow. And at the same time, your taxes haven't gone up. It's just hard for us to do because if we do modernization, if we find things to cut, there's an army of lobbyists just outside this door coming to scream at us. And some of those lobbyists aren't the types of people walking around here with Gucci's. They're the people they fly in from our home districts saying, David, we want that spending. And then you explain to them every dime, and I'm going to say this 3 or 4 times because for some reason I can't get this to burn in. Every dime a member of Congress votes on is borrowed. Every dime of defense is borrowed. Every dime of non-defense discretionary is borrowed. And when you hear us all talk about saying, hey, Congressman, over here's the mandatory spending, and that's like 3/4 of all spending. Believe it or not, there may be $300-400 billion of that's borrowed money also. And so, but I wanted to apologize for everyone. When I was showing the 9.2% of GDP in 9 budget years, that's if we basically take these tax expirations and just ignore it and just continue current policy. We blow ourselves up. So, all right, let me drop those back there. A couple other things I want to walk through. Apparently yesterday, the president got up and was trying to tell everyone, this is the best economy ever. Okay, really? That's an interesting statement. Sorry, throat. Economy's actually not bad. Now, there's some arguments to be made. The amount of cash the Democrats did in their Inflation Reduction Act and other things that they've been functionally subsidizing and then borrowing. Okay. But here's the reality. If the president's looking at you in the camera and telling you the best economy ever, well, that's not factual, but why don't you feel it? It's because much of America is poorer today than the day President Biden took office. If you live in the Phoenix, Scottsdale area, my home, if you don't make almost 27% more today than the day President Biden took office. You're poorer. So having someone tell you, oh, the economy's great, and yet you're having trouble paying for things. And the reason we made this board functionally, for you to maintain your purchasing power. Are you making, if you're an average person in average America, in my district, these numbers are substantially higher, because I'm from a district with some of the highest inflation in America. But if you're not making $1,115 more a month, because that's what you'd have to be having from 4 years ago, your purchasing power, you're poor. And I think actually that's the reason that voters turned and said, okay, I see these Democrats running lots of ads, saying crazy things, but yet it turns out the voters are actually really smart. They would look at their checking account. They'd look at the cost of their kids' clothes. They'd look at the grocery store and try to figure out why in the last week of the month they were losing their minds under stress. There's a lot of folks here that say things that just from an economist standpoint are insane. But your wages, policies that we engage in that don't make you wealthier, because prosperity is moral. It's moral for the poor person to be less poor. It's moral for the working person to be less stressed and to not understand the average American. In 4 some years, unless you're making about $13,000 more, you're poorer. And in my district, I think that number's like closer to 18, 19,000, because look, I have one of the higher income districts in America, but also one of the highest inflation. And I think that's the disconnect. And I think that understanding of it's not enough to run around and tell people, the economy's great. Look at all the money we've handed out to big businesses. Aren't you happy? How much we subsidize of the economy. And so many Americans are just trying to survive. One of the other things, apparently I did a horrible job trying to explain. And somewhere here in early January, I'll do a whole presentation on this. One of the fixations of the left is we need to tax corporations more. Okay, do you remember your elementary school economics class? Okay, I'm being sarcastic. Your high school economics class. A corporation taxes you. Who pays it? No, seriously. You don't think that doesn't pop up in the wages you pay your workers and the prices you pay as a consumer? In many ways, corporations are nothing more than pass-through entities. So when we did the tax reform into 2017, there was data that was coming out in the next couple of years that showed about 67% of those corporate tax cuts actually worked their way into wages. Remember, before the pandemic, we had some of the most robust growth of wages in American history, where the poor got less poor. Yes, wealthy did well. Now, there's a whole discussion, and one day I'm going to do a whole thing of what this government, the Federal Reserve, did to inflate assets, and that's actually where much of the wealth came from, was monetary policy, not tax policy. And the folks around here that don't do economics, that's for a different discussion. But what happens in a world where we can show we lowered taxes? Well, did that? Actually, it turns out we did something more complicated than that. You do realize what we call the TCJA. In 2017, there was like $7 trillion over 10 years of tax cuts. You know, there was like $5.5 trillion of tax hikes. Because the idea was to modernize. It had been 30-some years since the United States had updated its tax code, and much of the rest of the world was kicking our heads in. Do you remember the stories that President Obama over and over and over and over and over talked about? These companies are leaving America. They're moving their intellectual property to Ireland and these things. We fixed that. We made it so you wanted to be domiciled in the United States. That's why we had the miracle, the job growth, but also the wage growth. Before the pandemic, we had the fastest closure of income inequality in modern history in America. I would argue that's moral. When you get economic policy, when you get tax policy, when you get regulatory policy right, it's moral. People are less poor. And yet, so often I watch these people come behind these microphones and they say things that aren't true. So I was trying to point out in last week's presentation, just if you look at expenditures on growth and growing businesses and investments, when we did TCJA, you can actually see, the G7 without the United States in it, they were growing about the same. They were investing about the same. We exploded in growth. So back to your high school economics class. What are the two ways you pay people more? Your wages go up. So you're out there in the private sector, not government, because we're a distortion. What are the two ways your wages go up? Come on. You all showed up for your high school economics class. Inflation, your wages go up. But that just means you're treading water. You got paid more because everything costs more. Productivity. Things in the tax code, in the regulatory code, that get a business to buy the new piece of equipment that's better, faster, cheaper. Those investments in capital equipment, you're able to make more of whatever you do. Your employer is able to pay you more. It's how you create wage growth. And some of the idiot class here, I say, well, we're just going to tax businesses more. You do realize every economic model says is when I raise corporate taxes, it's the workers that ultimately pay for it, because your wage growth flattens out. But it's great politics, crap economics. And look, I did this earlier in the year. I brought all these charts trying to show that much of the wealth of this country, thank heaven, before the insanity of the pandemic, we had the tax reform, the regulatory reform, and the robust economic growth. Could you imagine if this country was at an anemic growth rate when that happened, what our lives would have been like? It's also one of the reasons we exploded out. Now, we spent too damn much money. There was too much fear, a number of stupid policies that hopefully we'll put into the history books that no one else will repeat. But the fact that we had modernized the tax code, it's what's given us a fight. And when President Biden yesterday was taking credit for a great economy, I sure hope he looked in the camera and said, thank you, Republicans, for modernizing our tax code so we maximize economic expansion and corporate stability. Because much of the wealth that this country, much of the opportunity, much of the employment base, and the way we can afford that is because we have a competitive tax code now where the rest of the world stops stealing our jobs. So, and one other thing I want to help try to understand, because every time I go near this subject, I get people, because their brains are sort of caught, and I don't mean to say this mean. I'm not trying to be mean. All right, let me walk through a concept. Mr. Speaker, you're from a state that produces hydrocarbons, oil, things of that nature. Back in the 70s and 80s, do you remember the posters, "No war for oil"? The world competed with each other for hydrocarbons. Do you remember? I had a professor back when I was a younger student who was famous for writing these papers about peak oil. The world's going to run out of hydrocarbons. Well, it turns out that was completely wrong because he didn't understand the ingenuity that God gave us as humans and how we found technology that to get to those hydrocarbons that in a previous decade were impossible. But the point where I'm going on this rambling, 70s, 80s, the world basically fought for hydrocarbons. Last decade, in many ways, we positioned ourselves for rare earths because that was the future economic of the world economy. Really, really smart economists right now are saying this decade, the next decade, and the decade after that, do you know what the world's going to compete over? smart people. The entire industrialized world is starting to, if not collapse, dramatically fall. You see the things going on in South Korea and Taiwan and much of Europe, the numbers happening all around us. In the United States, if you look at some of the Census Bureau data, I said this last week, it could be as early as 11 years from now, the United States will start having more deaths than births. So what would happen to you if I came to you and said, let's have an honest conversation, which is almost impossible around here, about the border and immigration, but we're going to talk about it like economists. Not our hearts, not our passions, not our anger, economists. What President Biden has allowed at the border, when you bring millions of people into the country with very moderate skill sets, what did you do to your domestic working poor? You know, I've done a whole presentation here showing that family, that young man, that young woman, they dropped out of high school. They sell their willingness to work. They're out hanging drywall. They're out doing this. What happens to their wage growth? Remember a moment ago we were talking about wage growth? What happens to their wage growth in a society when you've added millions and millions and millions of people with similar skill sets? You crush the working poor. This is actually why, if you look a couple decades ago, it was the Democrats, back when they gave a darn about working people, that actually cared about locking down the border, about taking on low-skill immigration. Those of us from border states, you see the chaos we've had to deal with. You know, it drives us insane when, you know, buses showed up in, you know, New York or Chicago and they lose their minds. And you look at some of the members from Congress, you know, from those states, and you look at them and say, you've been doing this to us for years, and now you figured out what we go through every single day? But back to The Economist. So the morality of when you flood a country of a certain level of skill set, you just made your working poor poor. There's an economic model out there that says it will be 10 years before the domestic working poor in America start to really see their wages go up outside inflation. And it's just because of population dynamics. How many other people are willing to sell their labor cheaper than they're willing? Flip side, and President Trump actually hit this, and hit this brilliantly. We're insane. We bring in smart people from all over the world to our universities. We educate them. We teach them our engineering. We teach them our biology. We teach them things, and then we send them home to compete against us. In a time where you need the society to become more productive. Remember, back to our high school education, as a society becomes more productive, our wages go up. And wages go up, we actually take in more tax receipts, but that's a side benefit. But wages grow up in a productive society, and then the cascade event, you may not be the person with the PhD in synthetic biology, but your wages go up when that person's down the street making a hell of a lot of money and changing the society and the economy for the future and the better. Well, it turns out this last summer we unleashed some of my joint economic economists to just try to do some of the math. Here's what I was talking about: low-skill immigration, asylum seekers, they consume hundreds of thousands of dollars of social services. That's the nature of our country. You know, if you can't afford it, you get health care. If you can't afford it, you get these other types of benefits. If you can't afford it, we'll get you housing. You know, our education system is based off the tax system. High skill, we actually make millions. Well, in this case, $800,000, $900,000, $900,000 in sort of the tax receipts and those things over a full career. Now, the fact of the matter is, I have some much fancier graphs that also show the age spectrum, because you got to say, you know, a young worker compared to an older worker, the number of years they're able to participate in the economy at a higher wage level. Bingo. And that's actually why Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Great Britain, the rest of the world we compete with have all gone to a point talent-based system. We are functionally the last industrial country in the world that does a familial system. And I promise you I'll get some very angry things coming to my office, but I'm being honest. Our immigration system is substantially based on who your family is. My cousin moved in, they're sponsoring me. It's a family chain migration system. But the rest of the world has figured out that as birth rates have collapsed around the world, people, we're desperate for people. I'm going to show you some charts coming where as a country that our birth rate started to roll over in 1990, we need people. Part of my job with the Joint Economic Committee, part of my job on Ways and Means is how do I finance all the things that people show up here wanting? And I know it's not something you hear a lot of Republicans talk about because so many people don't understand the demographics of our country. We're going to have an honest discussion that one of the most powerful things we can do for economic growth is actually modernizing our immigration system, not sending home people that we educate to compete with us. And there's models out there that says it would make our entire society more prosperous. So it's worth thinking about. And actually, can I give you just a thought experiment? Because I was trying to explain this to a reporter earlier today. One of the things that's expiring from our 2017 tax reform is research and development expensing. You go, huh? So you're a business and you're researching a new way to make something, a new piece of technology, a new type of biology, a new cure for a disease. In 2017, what we did is we made it so you could expense it right then. Under today's tax code, you basically depreciate it. So it says, okay, you spend $1 million trying to build a new tool, and you get to amortize that research over the next 7 years. Think about this. If I expense it in one day or do it over 7 years, government basically gets the same money, right? It's just the timing. But if you have the ability to say, I spent the money, I expensed it immediately, what happens? You get this virtual cycle of, I have a new, better tool that's better, faster, cheaper, and then you jump onto the next one, and you get that productivity curve. Back to productivity again. How do you pay people more money? But one of the complaints we were getting after 2017 is that all this money was going into research and development to make a society more prosperous, more modern, better, faster ways to cure people. And we had a shortage of people with skill sets. So one of our economists is trying to model what would happen if you said, we're going to do expensing of research and development, because we know that pops economic growth, but you also did talent-based immigration at the same time. You may get a multiplier effect. This is thinking like an economist. This is what we have to do to get ourselves out of this hole. Remember, functioning the first 2 months of what we call this fiscal year, we're borrowing about $10 billion a day. If you do the whole 12 months and be a little more honest by saying, because here's the April tax cycle, we're still borrowing about $74,000, $75,000 a second. And it just gets worse. And it gets worse because of demographics. I'm going to show this twice, but I got to say it again. 100%, close to 100% of the debt for the next 10 years is interest in healthcare. It's people like me. It's baby boomers. It's not Republican or Democrat. It's math. Except it's also the type of math we're not allowed really to talk about here. Look, I'm going to race through a couple of these boards just to make a point. For every dollar we take in tax receipts, we spend $1.39. Does that give you a sense? So when I have someone that comes to me and says, David, there's a continuing resolution coming. Now, we actually probably as Republicans would want to move that continuing resolution when we have President Trump, so we have unified Republican government, so maybe we could do some of the policy changes. But how about the debt ceiling? So we're going to also do a slide here on talking about, do you understand when you say, David, I don't want you to borrow a dime. Great. So I take in $1, I spend $1.39, but all I get to vote on is about 25% of the spending. How much of Medicare, how much of Social Security, how much of pension benefits, how much of VA benefits do you want us to cut? And I've done these entire presentations at home where you show the chart and people raise their hand. So I get these suggestions. I'll give you an example. I had one last night. A good friend sends me a thing that says, David, if you'd stop funding the UN, that would take care of our problems. Okay, we spend about $18 billion in the UN. The economic effect is believed it probably brings in about $9 billion a year. But let's just use the entire 18. If we're borrowing close to $7 billion a day, so getting rid of all the UN covers 2 2/3 of a day's worth of borrowing. And there's the problem. People don't understand the scale. Every dime a member of Congress votes on, all defense, all non-defense discretionary, is on borrowed money, plus a chunk of mandatory. You got to see. So when we do that presentation at a home district, and you have people give their suggestions, we get up to maybe 3 weeks of cuts. And then you start to say, okay, are you ready to get rid of all the Defense Department? Are you ready to get rid of the State Department? Are you ready to get rid of the FBI? Are you ready to get rid of this? Ready to get rid of that? And you just see the eyes on people because they really do believe, if we get rid of foreign aid, we can balance the budget. And then you show them all foreign aid is about 9 days of borrowing. I beg of the public, the way you influence members of Congress is know your math and know the scale of how upside down we are. And here's just trying to make that point once again, is if we're spending $1.39 for every dollar we take in, this little dot line is break even. That basically means every dime of discretionary, and that's defense too, and you got to pay interest. You don't pay your interest, you blow up the world and you blow us up because we have, the bonds out there. So functionally, we're so upside down, even part of what we call entitlements, mandatory, earned benefits, is on borrowed money. Mr. Speaker, may I ask how many minutes I have left?
The gentleman has 2.5 minutes remaining.
2.5 minutes remaining, sir.
All right, I'm going to talk faster. Sorry about that. Oh, the poor people have tried to take our words down. It's a punishment. I'm sorry. I have some other boards here, so I'm going to just try to do 2 more boards in this 2 minutes. Tax policy. You go back to functionally 1950, when we've had very high marginal tax rates. We get about 17, 18% of the economy in tax receipts. When we've had very low marginal tax rates, we get about 17, 18% of the economy in tax receipts. The fact of the matter is, for some reason in the American economy, for the last 75 years, we fall back into this mean. So when you have Democrats run around here and say, we need much higher marginal tax rates. But when we've done that, we still just get the same percentage of the economy. The secret, once again, is that productivity. Have a bigger economy. Our structural crisis now is if we're getting 17, 18% of the economy in tax receipts, we're spending about 24% of the economy year after year. So back to the point. This is the pie chart. Every dime of non-defense is borrowed. Every dime of defense is borrowed. You got to pay your interest. And remember, interest is now our second biggest expense in government. It's number 2 now. And part of this red here is also on borrowed money. There's ways to make the math work. The willingness to modernize this government. The willingness to use technology to crash the price of this government, crash the price of health care, but make us a healthier society. There's a way. I sometimes just feel like an idiot. I come behind this microphone every week. I do charts. I show these things saying, here's ways. Last week I showed, I think, $100, $200 billion of savings we could have in government by just modernization. There's hope. But I only think we have maybe 3 or 4 more years to start to understand how upside down we are. Mr. Speaker, I know I'm out of time. Thank you for your patience. There is hope, but there's only hope if the American people start to hear these words and start to push those of us in Congress to do the right thing. I yield back.